Hey everyone, welcome to SOFcast. This is your host, Sergeant Major Matt Parrish, and I'm excited to have two awesome guests in the studio today. Both guys who have great reputations from their years in the SEAL community, but also have done really awesome things post-transition. Mike Sarraille, Andy Stumpf, hey, welcome to SOFcast. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having us.
Indeed.
Are we using ranks?
I refuse. I'm not going to. I refuse.
I would hope not if you would like to, but I hope not. Yeah.
You're going to be Matt and you're going to be Mike.
Thank you.
Love it.
I appreciate that. All right, so let's talk kind of background, where you came from. Both you guys enlisted guys first. That's why you're worth a shit. So let's start there. What's up, Mike?
I mean, that's a good opening. Very true.
Well, we were both from Northern California.
Yeah.
I enlisted in the Marine Corps.
Yep.
I met a Force Recon Marine.
Yeah.
You're like, bro, I want to be
that guy. Yeah.
And helped me enlist. Did make it into the recon community.
Yeah.
Did the scout sniper thing. And then pretty early on, prior to 9/11, Marine Corps was like, hey, do you want to become an officer? And there's this thing called MECEP, which is just you retain your rank, you're getting paid, you go to school. And the war kicked off while I was there. I just finished Marine OCS, less than 30 days, 9/11 happened.
Wow.
And SOCOM, because the Marines weren't part of SOCOM yet, SOCOM was at the lead. And a couple of my recon buddies were like, bro, just make the leap. Yeah. And then additionally, as a recon Marine, back then, people would ask, what do you do? And you say a recon Marine, they're like, what's that? And you're like, oh, it's sort of like the Navy SEALs.
The answer you would give was, we're Navy SEALs, but in the Marines.
Yeah.
I've heard it, that response given many times.
And it very much was an ego play when, you hear like, oh, they go through some of the toughest training. I'm like, okay, I'm going to give it a shot. It worked out. Inter-service transfer, spent the remaining 15 years of my career in the SEALs, West Coast, and then a good portion at Dam Neck, and then got out at my 20 and haven't looked back.
Yeah, it's funny. One of the things I always ask is a lot of the folks that we have come on as guests, they haven't been on podcasts. People haven't heard their story. So I always want to ask, like, what made you want to join? Why'd you want to come in SOF? And a lot of us have this more like genteel answer now where it's like, oh, patriotism and whatever else. And there's really most likely more the like, hey, there was a yardstick out there that I wanted to measure myself against. Yeah. I wanted to get away from, the humdrum of my hometown, whatever it was. Even for me at post 9/11, it's like, yeah, that was a catalyst, but it was also like, hey, there's this Green Beret thing. Like, can I attain that? Andy, how about you coming up?
Like Mike said, Northern California. I'm born and raised in Santa Cruz, which is a beach town.
Yeah.
And military on my mom's side, on the Army, and the Navy side on my dad's side. And I would say probably both my mom and dad were not hoping that I would come home one day and say, hey, so I've got an idea about what I want to do for a living.
Yeah.
And probably to their chagrin, at 11, I knew that I wanted to be a SEAL, and I don't know why.
That's awesome.
Because people will always follow up with, well, how did you know? I'm like, I don't know. I remember I heard about it first from my dad, and he worked in the first squadron of patrol boats that went to Vietnam.
Nice.
So he worked with SEALs and peripheral to SEALs. So I remember that's where I heard it from first, but it became this just unsatiable desire to learn more. And then that's kind of just the path that it set for me. So high school, mostly for sports. I'm not going to sit here and claim that I academically knocked it out of the park. My strategy was athletic probation, due to grades, and then off. Probation, and then off. So I really...
A good cycle back and forth of eligibility.
I would never get kicked off the team, but I would get very close. And so I went through the delayed entry program and signed on the dotted line when I was still a junior in high school. And looking back, there's nothing wrong with that program, but you're still going to have to graduate high school.
Yep.
So... I think what I did at that time, and again, it's 95.
Right.
So the recruiter was very happy to see me come through the door. I probably was the easiest sell that they had ever had. And then I still had to wait a year before I went. So I might have signed the dotted line, but then left a few days after high school. Boot camp, BUDS, started off on the West Coast, did a short stint on the East Coast, back to the West Coast as a BUDS instructor, which is where I picked up my commission.
Yeah.
And then final operational tour back in 2010 with the West Coast team. So I got a good flavor of both.
Yeah.
It was fun.
Yeah. Talk to me about that kind of, as you come in, you've been thinking about this since you were 11.
Mm-hmm.
You finally ship out to boot camp, that sort of cultural collision that we all have no matter where you go. Coming from a beach town, was that the first time you'd really been confronted with sort of, hey, I've got people from all over the country? Or had you sort of been around that kind of culture?
It was probably the most diverse setting as far as a melting pot of people, but Marine Corps boot camp. I mean, so obviously the Marines are in the Department of the Navy, for clarity for everybody. I will say they are the men's department for sure. Navy boot camp was not difficult. I grew up with a father who was a brick mason and his father before him. And let's just say I worked all of my summers and all of my free time on very physically demanding job sites where nothing safe was happening and the language was very rough. So I was used to getting talked to in very colorful ways. I was used to working my ass off. And I remember laying in my bunk bed. I think I had the bottom bunk in boot camp, listening to people cry themselves to sleep for the first time. I was like, whoa, what do we got going on here? I feel like that wasn't the case with the Marine Corps, but it was in the Navy.
I can't remember too much crying in the Marine Corps, but they run a good, you know what OCS and boot camp are, is they're like the ultimate onboarding process.
Yeah.
If companies could replicate this, now they can't replicate it for 3 months, 24/7. But when you think
they would also get sued into oblivion.
Litigiously, you'd be in a litigiously difficult situation. But they pretty much explain the behaviors that are expected, the values, how to accelerate within that system. Yeah. But I came out of, I think like everyone came out of boot camp a different person. Yeah. And I love the fact that I came from the Marine Corps before I joined the SEAL teams. I needed that. I don't think I would have gotten what I needed to get from the Marine Corps had I gone to Navy boot camp.
There's a lot of rivalry, across the services and everything, but I think undisputed, everyone's like, oh yeah, Marine Corps boot camp, definitely the standard bearer as far as discipline and assimilation and everything else. It is always funny because I had similar situation in the Army as far as basic training. It is funny that some of these kids, it's like, what were you expecting? Like, it hasn't even really been that bad yet. And you're like, you joined, right? Like, no one kidnapped you and brought you here. Like, it's. Well,
there's always the one guy who says, well, my judge made me join.
Oh, that's true.
I haven't been doing that since Vietnam, buddy. Like, you're caught in that. Like, somebody said that in Buds, I remember. And they didn't last very long.
Yeah. Yeah. And then they probably told people for the rest of their life they fought an instructor, and that's why they didn't make it through.
Yeah.
It's the most common narrative.
I couldn't deal with it.
I've never met a Buds quitter, actually. Yeah. They all got broke. Like, oh yeah, it was the system was stacked against me. Yeah. I got into a fight with an instructor. I'm like, okay, cool. Like 90% of the people quit. It's okay. Like it doesn't actually. It's not a metric of who you are as a person. Right.
Yeah. If we had as many actual SEALs as we have people who claim that they're SEALs, we would probably have to double the defense budget. So
if not triple.
This day and age, I don't say that. I tell people I'm a Green Beret. Who wants to
hey, because nobody knows what that is. That's
wants to be associated with the SEAL teams. No,
fair. Let's talk Buds. As you get there, coming out, you've been thinking about this forever.
Yep.
Finally get there. What was that experience like for you at the time, pre 9/11?
It was, Buds is a challenging program.
Sure.
And you hear people say all the time, it's all mental, and I understand what they're trying to get to, but you can't discount the physical nature of the program too. It's very physically challenging. It grinds people into dust. What I didn't realize until I went back as an instructor is how many people actually get hurt. Because if you're going through as a class, my class started with about 180 people, and people would just drop off and you never see them again. So you don't necessarily know, did they quit? Did they get hurt? But it was kind of eye-opening going back as an instructor. But as a student, it was, I don't know if it's an advantage or a disadvantage because I could not find that much information about it. So we're talking late 90s. The internet was in its infancy.
Yeah.
I didn't actually know a whole lot. I knew there was 3 phases. I knew what they were dedicated. One is basically like physical training and, the crucible of first phase with Hell Week and then diving and then land warfare and demo. But that was kind of it. You get like 15th hand, rument of what's going to be going on. And I think not knowing what I was getting into for me personally probably made it easier because I just focused on what I was doing in the moment. When I went back as an instructor, people can find it online now. There's almost a day-by-day, hour-by-hour schedule of people putting up what happens. I don't know if it's a benefit.
Right.
There's probably a balance between the two, but it was what I expected it to be. It was very physically challenging. It was mentally challenging, but it had been all that I had ever wanted to do. Yeah. And when I showed up there the first day, I knew that it was either going to be graduation or somebody was going to have to kill me in the attempt of graduation. So,
no, that's awesome. I too kind of wonder about this age of transparency that we have. Like, there's guys that are literally like asking us questions on Instagram or whatever, and they're getting like all of this G2 over everything. and I don't know if that helps or if it's like
it doesn't.
I don't either.
It doesn't.
It's like
it's going to come down.
You
to
just show up and take it. Yeah, take it as you as it comes. Whatever else. Like I remember when I joined. I did the 18 X-ray program, which is the equivalent of going straight from the street in. And I remember just like grabbing every SF book there possibly was, but there still wasn't any like. I just sort of was aware of what the steps were as far as the phases, but what was in each one other than, hey, there's gonna be a lot of land nav in SFAS. Like, okay, and you start training for all that stuff. But
I remember interviewing General Jerry Boykin.
I
think he was USASOC commander at the time when they were debating the 18 X-ray program. What he told, the story he told was, some people, they got to have so much infantry time before they come over, and some guys are like, what does that really matter? I mean, they could also come over with bad experience, bad habits. But I guess as he told the story, as everyone was squabbling, and these are all the senior leaders, finally there was a sergeant major Vietnam vet, SF, who finally opened up and said, I was what's the word, SF baby?
Yep.
He's like, I never went to the Q course. It was on the job training in Vietnam, and everyone's like jaw dropped. And the 18 X-ray program is
a
your
huge
primary source.
Huge benefit for the Army as well, just like y'all's is for the Navy. I mean, those 90% or so that don't make it have still had to meet quite a high level of qualification, against your average recruit that's coming in with whatever GT score and PT test or whatever. I like to tell a story at the end of our selection class, because I was within the first year of 18 X-rays when they reinstituted the program, and they had the SF babies before, right? And they hated us, right? All the cats that had gone and come from the regular Army, most of them hated the fact that we had the opportunity to go, and we had a really high pass rate in selection because all the weed out came in the prep course. The prep course was like 5 times harder than the selection, right? And all the guys who weren't going to put out were gone and never even got a chance to step on to SFAS. But at the end of it, they do like, they call your roster number. There's a formation over here and a formation over here, and you don't know which one. You're kind of looking around like, oh, well, he's in good shape. I hope I'm in the right formation. We are in the one that they picked. And the SWIC Sergeant Major at the time, Chris Zetz, comes out, and he's like, giving us a little, hey, good job, whatever. And he's like, hey, who's tired of these damn X-rays? And like every conventional Army guy, raises their hand. We all just have name tapes or whatever. And all of us X-rays are kind of like, oh, crap. Is this going to be another one of those speeches? And he's like, well, I got news for you. I was a fucking X-ray. And it was called SF Babies at the time. And you better get used to it because we need guys going, and I was like, finally, someone actually is like on our side. It was amazing. But yeah, it was a cool program. It's very interesting to me, the juxtaposition between what he had coming in to you coming from like a solid background, recon Marine, and then entering that side. How did you view going through that training?
So, and I do want to come back to there's a good point, because I know who your audience is here. But so, as a recon Marine, already been through dive school, very much a sergeant discharged, and then like an ensign in my Jeep, heading out to Coronado. So when I got commissioned, a good mentor of mine who was the Marine officer, or MOI, instructor, and he was prior enlisted himself. He made a half joke. He's like, hey, can I give you a piece of advice? And I'm like, of course, sir. And he's like, don't quit or you'll embarrass the Marine Corps.
The entire Marine Corps.
We were laughing.
It's good advice.
But he was also dead serious. So I don't want to sound like the tough guy. Like it wasn't an option.
Right.
And I'd been through, again, I'd finished Honor Man at pretty much every school to include OCS. Yeah. Like I was going to represent the Marine Corps. And so I focused on leading. And the guys very much rallied around me. And I think I did have that prior enlisted respect. I was also a sniper and all that. But I think if anything, if my patience was tried, it was with some of the instructors who you come to find out didn't have great reputations.
Sure. Yeah.
And I wanted to get to the war as quickly as possible. And I was fortunate when I got to Team 3 that they were deployed and I just went right away. But to your point about this whole thing about, it's where this group think creates like, well, if we went through this, then the new guys have to go through it too. Hey, was it stupid? Did it serve a purpose? So when people become instructors over any assessment and selection process, like you're not guardians of the gate. There's a standard. Make sure the kids meet the standard. Yeah. And unless there's a character issue at play, then you're moving on. Yeah. But I was a guest instructor at the Q course in 08, second phase. But they got to take me over to SFAS. Yeah. You guys had codified what you were looking for so much more than any other community. My jaw dropped because then you explained the whole person concept, which was the first time I'd heard that, the attributes, the bullseye you're trying to fill. And if somebody has a majority of those attributes, there's a likelihood they're going to go on and a likelihood to become a great, special forces soldier.
Yeah.
So I was readily impressed. Not to say that, Buds didn't have a curriculum and a schedule. It was almost of the point though of like, let the process work for itself, and it will identify who makes it through. Yeah. Not all the right people made it through.
And they don't for ours either. I mean,
of course.
It's like that for everything. And as you guys went on and assessed and selected into other places, it's the same way, right? You got your top 10%, you got your bottom 10%, and you got the 80 in the middle. The bottom 10% at a special mission unit might be in a different percentage somewhere else, but they still, amongst their peers, it is what it is. You, by the way, as far as attributes and sort of encapsulating that, huge fan of your book, Talent War, as far as I have brought that to multiple different civilian CEOs, CHROs, and been like, hey, this is what you did a very good job of drawing that up in a very consumable package to be able to say like, hey, this is our character and attribute that we're, list that we're looking to screen for, and we'll train skill for, in some cases, years, as long as we've picked the right guy or gal.
Yeah. So the special operations community that's exiting the military, whether former or retired, is a talent pool that any business would want to pluck from.
Sure.
Now, that said, there's some egos and people have to look at things differently, change the way they lead. I mean, the one thing I'm going to say about the business world, and we talk about this, is it's harder to lead in the business world than it is the special operations community. And let me explain why. Because you went through one and a half years of hell to earn those tabs in that beret. Yeah. Same thing with the Trident. So every single person has buy-in. Yep. You're not going to find that in the business world. So you have to be more adept at leading and managing, because at the end of the day, we also have a command hierarchy. And if the boss or the master chief or sergeant major says you're doing this, at the end of the day, despite what you may think or disagree, you're doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a kind of exchange talk with some local business recruiters, like kind of executive search firm folks, and they wanted to know kind of, hey, what is our process, assessment, leadership development, all that stuff. And to me, one of the biggest sort of misnomers or misconceptions with a lot of folks in the business world is that it's only that type of leadership, right? Like there is in special operations the endpoint where like we've all chewed on the good idea, and at some point somebody's got to make the call and say like, hey man, this is what we're doing. Okay, got it. But a lot of the misconception from the outside world is like, it's very linear and very like directive leadership. And it's like, nah, I mean,
rock, paper, rank.
Yeah, not nearly as much in SOF as you would think. If you come in as the new team leader, and you're like, hey, sorry, Master Chief, sorry, Master Sergeant, we're doing it this way because my time in OCS taught me this. It's like, probably not going to get a lot of support. Yeah.
My 1 deployment to your 10 deployments.
Probably not going to get a lot of support there. But
I think people underestimate the collaborative nature of leadership and decision making in the SEAL community. But I think a lot of that is based off what they have access to, which is TV shows and movies, which don't focus on that whatsoever.
Yeah, it's hard to make that like an interesting part of some movie or whatever.
I would say it's impossible. Yeah, I've yet to see a 72-hour planning cycle where you're just staring at PowerPoint slides, thinking up good ideas for a mission that gets canceled because of weather anyway. So it's like, that's a terrible movie. I wouldn't go see it.
I don't want to see that one. Yeah, but it is true. I mean, like sort of positional leadership for most of the places in special ops is the lowest form of leadership. Like it's much more influential, much more collaborative. It's a misnomer a lot of times when you talk to somebody who has no familiarity with the military. It's like, well, there is some of that positional leadership in SOF, a little bit maybe more in the conventional military, but it is much more.
I would say if you're relying on positional leadership in the SOF community, you're failing.
Oh, 100%.
So, it's funny. There's a lot of civilian authors that have basically taken the special operations playbook and then written books about it. Simon Sinek. Dan Coyle with the Culture Code, Jamie Wheeler and Stephen, I think it's Kotler, with Steel and Fire. Mm-hmm. And in that one, I mean, they all came and observed special operations. Yeah. They talked about dynamic subordination. Have you heard that one? Mm-mm. Where it's basically based off, let's say, knowledge, expertise, that leadership role changes. You're not going to see a troop commander step up and watch a breacher place a breach on the door. No, that guy's going to be instructed by the breacher to go stand over there. Well, usually the officer is like, go back to your C2 element and get the hell out of here.
Like, are you lost, sir? Your position is about several kilometers away right now.
Whatever, regardless of rank, is that breacher's in charge and the E9's doing what he instructs him to do. And that rotates between the arc of the mission.
Yeah,
and
totally makes sense.
When you think about it, when you watch it, it's happening. Guys just don't know that definition. It's taking place.
No, that's a perfect encapsulation of it, because there isn't one single positional leader that leads every single interaction. And I'm with you, Andy. If you're, I would say positional leadership is maybe a 1%.
There's a time and
where
place.
There's like, all right, we've got all the good idea fairy stuff, like. But check it out.
Or on target, there's a time and place where you need to tell people what to do, and there's no time to question it. But for the most part, it should be based off of influence and not based off of rank.
Yeah. How did you see sort of leadership in your own maturation, but also amongst the sort of elements as you went through the SEAL community? You got a chance to see East and West. You got to continue into special mission units. How did you see your own maturation and sort of the maturation of folks around you as far as leadership in that way?
I view pre-9/11 service as, for me, as far as my development, I think it was essential, because I got to see the SEAL community in a time period where we were looking in the rearview mirror really hard. And by that, I mean, all the training blocks that we did, it was based off of legacy tactics. It was Vietnam stuff. And not that the Vietnam theater was not valid. And, was it 70, 80% of the earth is covered in water. So it makes sense to maintain those maritime routes. But then getting dropped over in Afghanistan and Iraq in a more urban environment, often it was interesting. So the SEAL community, not even from a leadership perspective, but from a tactical perspective, had to evolve very, very rapidly.
Sure.
I mean, I remember my first gear list over to OEF. It had dive mask and fins on there. And let me tell you, I fucking packed them. Not for the second one, but for the first one I did. Because like, you know what? Hey, what do I know?
River insert on the helmet. Yeah.
And, I think the best analogy for the improvement in leadership could be if I had a picture of how much I was wearing on my first target that I ever went on. I was the Michelin man with
drop holsters, drop mags.
I had Molly weaved into Molly, weaved into Molly that was covered in, and just like, like, what do I put in this pocket? I don't know. I'll put some of these other pouches in there in case I need this pouch. And then my last target, if I had seen myself on my very last day as somebody on my first day, I would have like, I need to pull you aside and talk to you because what you're doing is unsafe. But it was based off of the evolution, because what if weighs a lot, and ounces become pounds, and speed and the ability to move and be dynamic can be both offensive and defensive. And
absolutely.
What I appreciate the most about the SEAL community, and this doesn't happen with everybody because we're talking about a community of human beings. So there is the spectrum, and there are people who are better leaders than others and have better moral values and a better true north compass when it comes to integrity. My first, I was very young. I was 19 when I checked into my first SEAL team, and I landed with a group of people, again, pre-9/11. So we had a lot of time, and by we, I mean they had a lot of time to focus inward on the new personnel. So sometimes I was taped up in lockers, and it's not a big deal. I owned and earned every one of those instances for sure. Sometimes they would put shaving cream in there with me too. That's a different story. But it was mentorship heavy. Teaching, refining, testing, and because all we did was practice. Then we deploy for 6 months. My first deployment was to Japan. Where the most exciting thing I watched was a guy eject out of a Harrier. I'm like, this is wild. Okay. My second deployment was to Guam, and again, it was all conceptual. But it was based around mentorship. It was based around teaching people and giving them their task and then stepping back and let them make mistakes. I mean, you're obviously there to make sure that they have the little, like it's the bowling where the bumpers come up. You're not going to let them be catastrophic, but it empowers that person to grow as a decision maker. And then when I got to the East Coast, which is where I had the vast majority of my combat experience, the best example of leadership I ever was around was my first team leader. And he never raised his voice. He never ran. He would listen more than he talked. He would ask questions, and he would empower people to do their job. And he would let people come to him with ideas and then refine the idea based on the higher level of knowledge and information that he had, because that's how it works. You're not going to know everything that your team leader or troop chief or squadron CO knows. And,
Was that H?
Yeah, it was, and it's just a phenomenal dude. And I remember distinctly, I don't know if they still call it a rut, but we were setting up a rut in Boston because of military terminology would never change on a dime. I was setting up a portion of it, and I was not the trip lead. I was like the assistant trip lead, and he sat me down and he goes, listen, try to solve all the problems you can without coming to me. But I'm here at any time in case you need it, but exhaust all other options before coming to me, because this needs to be something that you own, that you figure out, and it'll help develop you. And it's like, fuck, that is exactly the way to be, as opposed to the guy coming over the top, leading with that, positional authority, which, I mean, I don't care what somebody's collar device is. If push comes to shove and they're telling me to do something that is either illegal or likely just tactically not savvy or is wrong, I'm not going to do it. I don't care what your rank device is. He was just the exact opposite, and it stuck with me from that point. And a lot of that, the reason that he was like that, I didn't know him pre 9/11, but as maturity in these theaters of war and experience just became so voluminous, I found more people being like that. They were less in a hurry to rush forward. They were more in a hurry to think and to slow down. And that evolution in that leadership style had a huge impact on the community, in my opinion, at least. I don't know your thoughts, Mike.
So starting with the Marine Corps, that was necessary for me, especially from a maturity standpoint, and really learning that leadership and culture are cemented through behavior. Not words. And the amount of discipline that, in my platoon sergeant, Fast Eddie, and my platoon commander, it really set the bar for me. And I carried that over into the SEAL teams. I'll be honest, starting on the West Coast, and we were talking about this on the way over, I questioned whether the SEAL teams were the right place for me. Now that means probably, was I to blame with some of the things going on there? Yeah, probably. But I found SEAL Team 3, I didn't enjoy the leadership and the culture and the leadership style. Maybe it was a culture shock switching from the Marine Corps over to that. But a lot of the guys that I served with and came up with in teams agree with me on that. They didn't necessarily like that culture, and it was the early days of the war. And so, you hear about these guys and what they're doing in JSOC, and I'm like, okay, hey, maybe that's my next challenge. And in between that, I did do a tour as the junior officer training course director at Buds, and I loved it. I mean, everyone loves going downrange with the guys. That's the ultimate. But I only did this for 8 months because I was heading for assessment and selection, but training the next line of ensigns, 01s, who are just like sponges.
They're so malleable at that point in their career.
And they want the knowledge and how you act around them, and the standard you set is what they're going to carry forward. Of course, their initial platoon chiefs and the platoon commanders are also going to help solidify that. But I mean, I still get emails to this day from guys that are now commanders and taking SEAL teams like, hey, thanks for what you did. And I'm like, bro, I didn't do anything. I had 3 deployments on my belt at the time. I barely knew my head from my ass. But when I got to the East Coast, it was a completely different standard that I probably just squeezed by in assessment and selection. And then, I mean, you're talking about, and I don't want to use active duty guys, but Chris Fussell, who's very tight with, General McChrystal. I had leaders like that, and the list goes on. And the senior enlisted were just, quite frankly, I didn't belong in the same room. And I remember the way these senior enlisted. See, there always get comments. I got comments from Joe Rogan.
I heard they had a quota that they needed to meet, and they were just one body short when he went through. I don't know if I'm making that up or I actually heard that.
Marine? Okay.
I get comments from the Joe Rogan, like little DMs like, bro, does Andy not like you? And I'm like, no, that's just Andy. Andy's just a dick. But
if you listen to Cleared Hot,
no, it was a completely different standard. And it was wildly different than what I saw in the conventional SEAL teams. And that really made me reflect about, I needed to step up and certain theatrics that maybe came with the West Coast, like that wasn't going to fly there. Just be a person, be empathetic, be respectful, be kind, do your job, and take care of the boys. And you know what? Your reputation will speak for itself.
Yeah, back to your point about instructing in that junior officer course. I think we've all been through a lot of different courses in our career. The smallest differentiation is like that instructor who gives, like it. There's usually not just one. There's usually a good group of them. But those are the people that, even if they're not trying really to make some massive impact, it's like, as a student, you can tell a huge difference between the guy who's just like, oh man, I hate this. I'm so pissed that I'm doing whatever, a Buds tour, a Swig tour, whatever. And it's like, then there's a couple guys who are like, I'm going to make the most out of this for the 8 months or 3 years, whatever. I give a shit about what I'm putting out because I know it's going to impact, where I'm going to go back to most likely.
And we, because of the soft conventional integration at that time in Iraq.
Yeah.
One of the victories we did have in the junior officer training course is we pulled a 7th group officer named Jose over to teach the soft conventional integration because it wasn't just it wasn't one of our core skills at the time. Yeah. We're now very good.
Sure.
We caught up, but
20 years of,
that's the other thing about the war, I'll say it, is, in the Marine Corps, they breed you to pretty much hate every other service. It's just part of the fun. Yeah. But then you get on the battlefield with, Army Airborne. Yeah. Like the first of the 506 was my first real exposure in combat, led by a guy named Ronald Clark at the time, Lieutenant Colonel. Now I think he's a 3-star. Yeah. And you're like, why was I taught that? These guys are good to go, and they have Bradleys and they have tanks, which is a bit of an upgrade from the Marine Corps coming in on a 5-ton with 40 Marines with M16s.
The individual SEAL teams used to fight each other pre 9/11. In the absence of an enemy, we will fight each other. I remember.
Very true.
So the SEAL teams used to be geographically specialized when I got in. So Team 5 was like Southwest Asia, so we'd go do cold weather, and Team 3 was doing desert stuff. And I was so jealous of their like desert camouflage, old chocolate chip, Gulf War Un. And they liked my, woodland camis. And I'm like, hey man, you want to trade me a pair? And they're like, F you through the fence. And I'm like, are we all the same? I went through Buds with you, dude. Like, what's your problem? So yeah, we would literally fight each other, absent an enemy. And then I would say the military was definitely very color graded, red for Marines, blue for Navy, green for Army, and then it's just a pot of gray after 9/11. It all just got thrown into the same thing, and I never had any instances of any like inter-service rivalries.
No. I impressed by everyone, especially, even when you finally get a PJ or a CCT, you're like, why are SEALs doing the JTAC thing? Like, you've got this.
Or touching me if I'm leaking hydraulic fluid. Just give me a PJ, please.
Yeah, it's weird. In my career, I seem to we had more issues sometimes with conventional Army than we did crossing service lines. Because I think there was like more willingness crossing service lines to be like, oh, okay, hey, like, sometimes there was a little bit of friction because it was Army, and we have
the jealousy and ego
prima donna stuff
is real. The jealousy and ego thing is real. I mean, let's be honest. The special operations career, from a perspective of, I'll use a sloppy term, the sexiness of it.
Sure, yeah.
It is what it is.
Sure, yeah.
And there can be some animosity that is bred in that, and a lot of that is also built on people in the special operations community getting a chip on their shoulder
and giving someone a negative impression when they're a lieutenant, and then they become a colonel.
I mean, come on, man. We complain when we're not staying at a Marriott, the Holiday Inn. You're putting us up at the Holiday. Do you know who we are?
I think most of the time we just put the officers at the Holiday Inn. We were at the Marriott. I don't know what's going on with you guys.
No doubt.
Yeah.
I'm curious, as you guys came through, we had a big evolution. I obviously, as the POTF guy, Preservation of Force and Family, now I talk about all this human performance stuff, and it's like normalized to most people that are in right now, right? Like, we've had this program for 10 years, these awesome gyms. In some places, the program's been going on for 15, and it's normal for folks that are coming through and either getting their trident, getting their tab, whatever, and they sort of take it for granted. I'm curious to y'all's thoughts as far as the evolution over your career of going from like, hey, we're just gonna hit it hard, to more of a, hey, we can be a little bit more educated on taking care of our, our bodies, our minds, all those things. How did you guys see that from your perspective of leading teams and being in different places across your career?
That shift was happening as I was getting out. Yeah. So I got out in 2013 and I missed a lot of that evolution, which I think that evolution is fantastic. It was still a little bit of more is probably better.
Sure.
And let's just compete against each other until we break at some point in time. So I didn't get to experience a lot of that. I mean, as I was leaving, the SEAL community was making a lot of changes. They were becoming much more holistic and focusing on more than the warfighter and bringing the families in and third location decompressions and, trying to remove the stigma from post-traumatic stress and bringing in psychologists and trainers. But I was kind of checked out, meaning I had a few months left in the military. So I know that was happening, but I can't speak to it from personal experience because it passed me over.
So, how large is SOCOM now?
How large? 70,000, I think, is what we quote. 65,000, but a lot of that is sort of ancillary folks.
So I think you've got to cut SOCOM or break. The war was going on, and it was the needs of the war, and we have very little options. I've never seen a organization of this size enact change as quickly as any other organization in the government or the private sector. Yeah. And so they've done a good job with the preservation of the force and putting
other
these
than making
protocols.
a really long, silly name out of it. But
that's just the military.
That's military.
I know.
But I think we should be patting ourselves on the back for making those changes as rapidly as they did. Again, you're not going to see that anywhere in the private sector. So would I have deployed less? No.
Yeah,
If given the option, most guys won't tap out. I absolutely adored it. I loved the time forward with the guys. I wouldn't change anything in the world, but I did run into a wall. This is me personally.
Yep.
I thought I was going to be a 30-year guy, and then all of a sudden, after it was 11th combat deployment, like I just hit a wall. It didn't even see it coming.
Yep.
And for me, I had to step off the train. But it is hard to ask an A-type personality to step off the battlefield.
100%.
I also think SOCOM as a whole, and what do I know? I got as a lieutenant commander. There's times that special operations was utilized when it shouldn't.
Yep.
There's certain outstations in certain countries that didn't require a special operations team. Maybe it required a Marine infantry squad or a Army infantry squad led by a SOF personnel, an E5 or an E6.
Sure.
But I think there's that fear that if we let go of that and something happens, the mission will go to somebody else.
Yeah, we had a legacy of always wanting to, even tactically find work. And we got to the point where, I say for SF, and it's the same for you all, like we've never seen a mission we didn't want to do, or that because we assess and select and train such adaptable people who are dynamic problem solvers, they can do that mission. It's just back to your point. And this has been an evolution. For the last 3 or 4 years, there's been a lot more talk about resetting that. Because, in with human performance, we're not trying to take people off the battlefield. We want to make sure that you don't hit that wall. Yeah. So that if you want to, if you want to stay on, you're getting sort of check-ins along the way so you don't hit the wall. Because most of my generation is the same way. Hit the wall at some point and was like, holy cow, it's time to do it.
There's also a stigma that nobody's going to come forward and say, hey, I think I just need to take this one deployment off, this one workup off, and then get back into the rotation.
Yeah, it's tough. Yeah, the same way for every one of our career fields.
Is there's
not a good
inside of SOCOM? Has there ever been any discussion about limiting people's exposure to combat?
Not to combat specifically that I've ever heard. I can't speak for every conversation. There is a little bit more conversation on how are we more intentional about blast. Yeah. So because we all grew up in the time, and I'm like the generation just after you guys, but we served at least 10 years in the same time frame. That was like, if you're going to breaching training, we might reduce the net explosive weight a little bit, but we're still banging it pretty good all the time and making sure we get reps. And,
even from a psychological component. So I
haven't heard that yet.
I ask a lot of the people who come on. I think I asked Mike when he was on, and the people that I know who are the most seasoned, who have the most deployments, they all answer the same way. In hindsight, they think it would be a good idea to limit people's exposure to combat operations. Right. However, the next thing out of their mouth is, there's no way you could have ever stopped me. So I'm not saying that there's an answer there, but there's a physical wall and there's also a physiological and emotional and psychological wall. Yeah. That, that what I have said for a long time, and I'll stick with it, is if you touch war, it touches you back. And there is a point in time where that fingerprint turns into a bruise. And
that's a great way to look at it. Yeah.
I know a lot of people who are struggling. Yeah. And, it's really easy to focus on going into the gym and like, hey, we'll rehab your range of motion on your tendon or whatever it is. But I don't know. I don't think anybody would have been able to stop me either. But I also wonder what it would do to the health of the force if there was some way to limit or gate. I don't know. I don't know the answer. But
here's an answer that people don't like. It just is what it is. Yeah. And you can't train a horse to be a racehorse and then not expect it to run. Right. So if I looked at 27-year-old Andy and said, hey, you're not going to deploy on this one, but all the boys are going down range, you probably would have had some choice words. Yeah.
At 27, I would have had choice words. But when I'm 55 years old and I still have my mental acuity, because in that time period where people were gone, I actually focused intrinsically on myself and dealt with the issues or relieved the steam inside. So in the moment, I'd have been pissed. And I probably would have gone and pissed in your cage, you know, or like tied your shoelaces together, put a flashbang underneath one of your shoes. Not that I've ever done those things, they're hypothetical, but in the end, looking back, that's actually what's important. It's not how I felt about that in the moment.
I think it's important to realize that we also now are looking back, all of us, from seeing that we had 20 years. At the time, we never even had to have that conversation because there was no expectation that we were going to get to the point where guys were doing 11. You know, at that point, I remember going through the Q course and graduating in 05 and thinking I was going to miss the war.
Oh, there's
you know
a lot
what
of
I mean?
people who felt the
it
same
was
way.
like it was like these dudes. You know, when I was in basic training was when they were making the march to Baghdad. And I was like, we're going to miss them both. Afghanistan's going to be over. Iraq's going to be over. I got 2 years of the Q course. Like, we never had the foresight, you know, because we were fighting 6-month wars constantly. And so now I think retroactively or retrospectively, I should say, I think we should be looking at some of those things. We're definitely looking at it in the blast arena. I don't know if there's been, you know, I haven't been privy to any talks about.
And I don't have the answer by any stretch.
But it's a good conversation.
Those conversations were happening. And that makes sense. If we can mitigate the exposure to blast injuries. Same with respiratory. I don't know, like venous respiratory is one of these things. If guys are doing breaches, they're wearing that thing. But training, we all know this training has to be hard.
Oh, it has
training has to be brutal.
100%. Yeah, I mean, I know there was, you know, every once in a while there's a leaked video or whatever that you know brings the ire of maybe it shouldn't be that hard. But I thought you guys did a great job of walking through that on Rogan. By the way,
the tear gas video.
I think you know, I don't want to dive back into the exact same conversation, but I think you guys did a great job. If you haven't heard that episode, I highly recommend it.
One of the biggest mistakes there is why does a cadre member have a cell phone out filming that stuff? It's like, do your job, man. It's not your job to sit there and do that.
No, I completely agree. But I think there are ways to make sure that training is hard, but understand that, you know, I certainly didn't understand it. As a master breacher on a crisis response force team for a long time, hitting a lot of breaches again and again and again, had no idea that I was doing far more damage to myself in training than what I was ever getting in combat. And I think there's a happy medium, right? I think we swung to where I certainly am not advocating that you do dry placement drills all the time, but I do think at least having some intention on realizing like, hey man, if I do 4 weeks in a row of a ton of interior breaching and the whole time we're doing full new charges, like, do I really need to be doing that? Or are there ways to maybe set up training to at least front load maybe the younger guys who need more of the actual hands-on repetition of that versus, you know, hey, we're just going to single strand or whatever. Like the charge is built the same. Yeah. It's a ECT 300 and it's not giving us quite as much, you know, overpressure. I just think there are ways now that we're at least acknowledging it. Before there was no real conversation.
This is easy to say from my position, but SOCOM should almost be like an Olympic training center in terms of human performance. Yeah. I mean, to get it also makes sense to get longevity from your operators, also mitigating the post-career ailments. Because I'm one hip replacement deep. Yeah, man. Probably getting a second one here post 777 expedition.
Both of you guys got wounded in combat. How was your kind of experience coming back out of that? Because that was also pre sort of Care Coalition and all of those things. Like, how did you feel as far as getting that rehab from an actual injury and being able to get back into the fight?
I received zero rehab. I did it on my own. Yeah. I got back. I took a commercial flight home after checking myself out of the hospital in Germany.
Wow.
And I was prescribed a variety of medications for pain and sleep. And I remember I woke up one morning and I had about a 150 resting heart rate with just pounding headache. Yeah. And my wife at the time took me to Portsmouth Naval Hospital. And then there was like an E3, E4 corpsman who was checking me in. They're like, hey, what's going on? I'm like, basically, I feel like my fucking head is going to explode. My heart is racing. Like, well, okay, so what happened? I was like, gunshot wound to the hip. And the guy put the piece of paper down and the pen, and he looked at me and he goes, self-inflicted? Swear to God. And then I sat in the waiting room for like 5 hours while they took people with like the sniffles and the flu. And
plantar fasciitis.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Like in that moment, I was pissed, and I look back and I realized it was just early on in the war, and Portsmouth Naval Hospital was not used to seeing people who had a battlefield injury. So I have no ill feelings towards those people, but I still remember like just slowly putting the paper down, slowly putting the pen down, and asking me if I had shot myself in the hip. I'm like, wow, this is where we are. I took it upon myself to basically rehab and That's what I did. And it took, for me, that injury was the mechanism for me leaving the East Coast and ending up as a BUD/S instructor, which was a great place to just take more time to rehab physically, but also emotionally as well too. Yeah. So
no, that's why I ask. It's not to we obviously have created a ton of programs since then to try to keep guys from having to have that. But I think it's interesting, sort of to what I said earlier, like the normalization of some of these programs becomes like the wallpaper, and it's like, no. Remember, as we got a bunch of congressional folks that listen to this as well. Like, this is where we were.
Yeah.
Like before this spigot of money was turned on for POTIF, for Warrior Care Program, all that stuff. This is where we were. This is why we built those things in extremis. And as the big long wars are ended, I just don't want us to just get back into the place where that was normal.
Yeah.
And I must have been a recipient of what you went through, because I cannot dish out enough accolades to the SEAL community, to the SOCOM Care Coalition, from the time I was wounded to the time I was back in the United States. I mean, I was getting daily attention. They were debriding my wounds. And then, the SOCOM Care Coalition was calling me still on active duty, which didn't make sense. I'm like, no, I'm good. And they still call me yearly. Hey, what do you need? What can we do for you? And I've tried to tell them, I'm like, hey, I am good. I had, $1 million wounds. There are people that need much more attention. Call them. But they call every year, man. So that program is top notch.
Yeah, we got some amazing Americans that work as like regional care coordinators and all that stuff that are, you want to talk about like impact and purpose for a job. There's some amazing folks that are they're doing that. So, all right, you guys get out, start into the sort of civilian world. Also, a little bit different transition timeline than hopefully what we're trying to build, with a little bit more support around it. How'd you feel jumping out there? And what was your thought process as you enter sort of the post-service world?
It took me a while to find my way. I was kind of just like a driver swerving over the road a little bit. So before I had gotten out, I used a pretty traditional, or at the time, a program called CrossFit. I found that when I was rehabbing myself, and I ended up working for the company. Yeah. And I was working for a few years before I got out, just on the weekends teaching seminars. Yeah. So I had an off-ramp from one job to another that provided stability. And I was medically retired, so I was able to maintain my pension and healthcare, which is huge. It takes a lot off people's plates. So
absolutely,
I'm like, okay, I'll explore the CrossFit world, and it wasn't what I wanted to be doing. It was more a personality conflict with a certain key individuals inside of that organization. Yeah. And then I tried aviation for a bit, and then professional skydiving for a bit, and public speaking for a bit. And then I met Joe, and I did through fundraising. Actually, that's actually was my impetus for meeting Joe, was through the initial fundraising, bringing it back full circle.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Podcast, and some
had you already started Cleared Hot before that, or did you start that?
I had never listened to a podcast before I was on Joe's the first time.
Yeah,
which
that's awesome. Yeah,
I should have done some research. I maybe could have tempered what I said just a little bit on a few certain topics, but I struggle with that. I'm pretty much an open book, like I am what I am.
That's what makes it popular. Yeah.
But it took time. I didn't know. I certainly struggled with a loss of a sense of purpose. You go from a job that can make the news to sitting there watching it having no impact, which is where I wanted to fundraise for the SEAL Foundation. Mm-hmm. And I knew I loved jumping, and it was this kind of very circuitous path. And I'm not exactly sure where I'm going to go and what I want to do. The podcast is by far the most rewarding things I do, because I get to sit down and have conversations with people that interest me.
Right.
But that only came about because I took opportunities as they came up. And my advice for people looking to get out is if you have a structured plan and you know what you want to do, that's great. Yeah. But if you don't, that's also okay. I'm not saying wait till the day that you get out and then try to figure it out. But if you can't put a pin in the ground as to this is what I want to do for the X number of years of my life, or the next phase of my life, there's nothing wrong with that. Take the opportunities as they come up to you, and don't be afraid to say no. It's the most powerful word, and I'm glad, I went down some of these paths and I got to a point and I'm like, no, okay, I'm not going to do this anymore. Yeah. And in doing so, it actually opened up other opportunities for me, but you have to have the ability to do that. And most of the skills that we learn, specifically in the special operations community, if you think about it, it's problem solving. It's adversity that you either work your way through, or you fail, you have a micro failure, right? You're still avoiding macro failure. You have a micro failure and it becomes a motivation for you. You get used to that over a career. It's like, oh, well, this business venture didn't work out, on to the next. Yep. You're going to be okay. Don't be blind when you're getting ready to get out, but don't put too much pressure on yourself that you have to define every next step along the way.
That's good advice.
I had a luxury of my last tour before I was retired.
Story of your life.
Yeah.
Luxury.
University of Texas, the Naval ROTC.
Yeah.
Really, I was getting my MBA, and I was supposed to go back to the fleet afterwards. But great leaders, I'm like, hey, I'm just done.
Yeah.
And they're like, all right, put your paperwork in. So I got my MBA, which made me dangerous enough, much like somebody coming out of Buds that actually thinks they know what they're doing. And I didn't. I'm like Andy, you've done a number of things, done the keynote speaking, the leadership development, wrote the book, which let me caveat, the book is not the So There I Was. The book
it's
was
completely different.
Third party perspective. It actually started like, I got a lot of hate from SEALs because it
was SF in the beginning.
It starts with a story about the horse soldiers, and a lot of it was focused on SFAS.
Yeah.
But I've made it my mission to help place special operations guys and women into small to mid-sized company leadership positions, which we found is the perfect niche. That's going on through Talent War Group.
Yep.
And then we also do leadership development, but it looks like that leadership development is switching over to legacy expeditions. We've got some bold plans, and I'll tell you this, I approached Andy for the character individual that he was. We didn't really serve together, but his reputation preceded him.
He wanted to do a calendar, and apparently that was his first thought. And I was like, oh, Mr. October, I'm in.
That's your month. Now you're picking October. Okay.
I don't know if people have seen you t-shirts, but you should Google it. Pair it with a little olive oil. You're welcome.
I look back at my time in special operations with just absolute awe in the guys we served with.
Yeah.
Not all of them, but
for sure.
A good majority of them.
Yeah. The most of them that you remember. Yeah.
Yeah. And,
Either good
for
or
the
bad.
ones that didn't come home, they have a legacy. And, if you ask them, they probably didn't give a about their legacy, but it matters to me.
Yeah.
And it matters to the kids they left behind. So Legacy Expeditions is going to tell, one, we're going to tell their stories.
Sure.
And if you don't tell their stories die.
Yeah.
And if we can raise some money for the education through organizations like Special Operations Warrior Foundation and Folds of Honor, which are purely educational scholarships for kids of fallen or disabled vets, that's what we're going to do. Now, strangely, we've gotten into some things like the content game, which, I think we intend to be on but behind the cameras, letting other people tell the story.
Sure.
It's the antithesis of the special operations world.
Yeah.
Like, okay, does everybody have their cameras on? Not that people weren't filming stuff, but I didn't have a presence on social media until I think I was out of the military.
Right.
People are like, oh, I posted on this or that. I'm like, what is that?
Yeah.
And now it's an incredible vehicle that you can tell people stories with, or get their attention and lateral towards things like Folds of Honor.
Right.
But it's the antithesis. It's how did you describe it? It's like it makes your skin crawl watching yourself. Yeah, it's cringy. Because we come from a place like, don't say anything, don't do anything, and now you're just like, oh, God.
Oh, yeah.
But that's me on the screen.
I can completely relate on this podcast right here.
There are no better storytellers.
100%.
No better storytellers than around the fireplace overseas with some guy telling a story with everyone just cracking up. And yes, special operations guys tend to not let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Very true.
But no, these guys are natural storytellers, and their story needs to be told. And it's not like we were elected to tell it, but if no one's going to do it, we're going to step up and we're going to do it.
It's phenomenal. I mean, that's a similar conversation I had when we wanted to start this thing. When they first came out, I was like, I don't want anything to do with it. I had nothing about me in the military. It was like pictures of my kids on social media, and I was like, I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to, and the line that pierced through to me was like, hey, it was right in the time where we were having some of these big scandals, like these rotten apples. And we were all saying like, those people don't represent us. Like, we've got the most amazing people in the world all over the place. And the kind of creator of the show at the time was like, well, you guys all say that, but like, if you don't, like, okay, if those people don't represent you, who does?
Yeah.
And so it's like,
not the
who
right
tells
people.
the story, right? Well, who shines a light on the people who are doing good things, or memorializing or remembering the legacies of, the heroes that didn't come back. And we do that sometimes within the community. But to your point, like 30 minutes ago, what breaks through on the movie or TV is not even close to what the real, kind of magic of SOF is.
And the mantra has permeated to all the communities, but the quiet professionals came from the SF community.
But not silent, yeah.
But not silent.
Yeah.
And so this goes to when we are trying to put guys into companies.
Yeah.
Is people have this stereotype of who we are, because it's, again, the guys who are on social media all the time, who are not always the best representatives, are painting a narrative that becomes the norm. And so we're hoping we can show the when people ask me like, hey, well, and I'm not going to use names here, hey, was everyone like this warrior that's out in the press? I'm like, no.
Yeah.
The most lethal warriors I knew were kind.
Yeah.
They were empathetic. They were respectful, and people gravitated to them for who they were and what they stood for. And that's the image that needs to get out there. And sometimes that's not happening.
No, 100%. And, I'll give our quick disclaimer. If you've listened to the show before, you've heard it plenty of times. SOCOM doesn't endorse any particular nonprofit, SOWF, Folds of Honor, whatever. But we want to talk to people from our community who are doing great things. And I will say personally, not from USOCOM, but Talent War, as far as that book, when you guys sent it, I was like, oh, okay, another book. And I was like, all right, I've got a bunch of them that are sort of on my to-read list. And I started digging into that, and it was different than what I thought it was going to be because it's focused towards...
Well, one, it's written by a SEAL. You're like, I'm not going to read this.
I was like, all right, what did Mike do? No, I'm just kidding. But I thought it was very good. Like I said, I've passed it on to a lot of people and recommended it for people in the community to read, to just sort of realize. I think it helps realize your value proposition too, if you want to go into a sort of a corporate executive kind of slot. But I think it does a great job of, in the process of teaching CHROs and CEOs why they should create a new talent process. It also says, hey, there's a huge talent pool of guys that have been developed by this process that would also be value add to your organization. So I think it's awesome. Let's talk specifically Everest first, as far as raising money for Special Ops Warrior Foundation, and then the one that you guys are going to launch on in January. This will release... I think at the end of this is going to release like right after Christmas, right before.
That's when we start. I leave the 29th. I think you leave the 28th.
That's why we're trying to push this one as at that time.
So Everest post hip replacement, guy named Fred Williams, who's the president and CEO, former SEAL of Complete Parachute Solutions. They do a lot of the training for military. Was orchestrating a trip, and I basically said, hey man, I need this. Like, how do I get on this? And he said, it's this dollar amount. And I was like, that's not going to happen.
I don't need it that much.
So I've got to be careful. I may have taken a few loans that the wife doesn't know about that are fully paid. So she be getting some Gucci stuff for Christmas. So I went out and found sponsors that would sponsor me.
Yeah.
And, on this one, I said, hey, I'm going to jump in honor of the Extortion 17 guys because I knew all of them. He knew them all as well. And let's see what we can do in terms of raising money for their kids' scholarships because 25 plus kids were left without their fathers. And that experience, well, one, I lied to Fred. He's like, when's the last time you jumped? I'm like, like last week. It's been like 5 years. And they ran, so this is what I love. And we run Legacy the same way. We follow the special operations playbook.
Sure,
if we're doing these, we mitigate risk by repetition and training. We've done 2 training trips for 777 coming up. But Everest was spiritual. That terrain made you feel small in a good way. And when I came back from that and he wasn't able to go on it just due to timing, I'm like, okay.
Also didn't receive an invite, but it's fine. We won't get stuck in the details.
That was the timing. There was bad timing on sending you the invite.
You bring Andy. Andy sucks up the spotlight.
I'm just going to tell you the truth. I never got an invite.
The timing was off on the invite.
I need to be more. I need to do more. And we started talking because we had already started planning 777 in July of 2021.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay. Because a number of guys had reached out to me and they're like, how do I get on this trip? I'm like, Andy, this next one, 777, is very extravagant, so we're limited in capacity. Yeah. I'm like, we need to train vets to skydive. We need to bring our former special operations brothers on some of these expeditions. Like, go skydive into Wyoming and do a hunt.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Go to Montana. But 777 has been around for a long time. Even Bill Booth, who is iconic in the skydiving community, owner of UPT, created the tandem system.
Well, let's be clear, it's been around so long that there is it's been done many times. Not even just the idea, it's been done many times. Granted, it took the person months.
7 months.
Yeah, but this is not a revelatory Mike and I sitting around over a cocktail saying, what can we do that has never been done?
Right.
It's not that at all.
So, this has...
But scope it for us in case... it's seven continents.
7 days, 7 skydives. Even if we do it in 14 days, we are setting 2 records, the tandem and the sports skydiving. Yeah. We're starting in Antarctica because that's the wildest variable.
Sure.
And again, similar to soft planning, we've changed the route like 3 or 4 times. We started at 105 hours on an airplane. We've got it down to 65. That 40 hours gives us, some fudge to get it within the 7 days. So Antarctica to Santiago, to Miami, to Barcelona, to Cairo over the pyramids.
Nice.
Abu Dhabi, who, they are supporting. And so we're going to go have a moment of silence at their National Fallen Soldier Monument, and then on to Perth, where we set the record. We will then fly back to Tampa here and skydive, and it'll probably be around January 18th to 22nd.
Nice.
It's a window. And that 8th celebratory jump is for the Kabul 13. What I did miss is that each of the jumps into the continents are, so Andy's jumping in honor of Dave Hall, former SEAL. I'm jumping in honor of Michael Mansour, who jumped on a grenade and saved my life. And we've got, Jericho Denman, who was a career 75th Ranger Regiment. Mike Glover couldn't make it, but we're still jumping in honor of Master Sergeant Ben Bittner. And so it really is a SOF-centric evolution, but this has been a long time. It took a lot of money to raise to do it.
Yeah.
We've had 2 awesome training camps, the second of which Andy missed.
Were you invited to this one?
I was invited to that one, but he scheduled it before asking me about my particular calendar, so I already had something on the books.
Probably most needing of the training.
Yeah, I was going to say the world record holder and what?
Listen, if we have time, we'll splice in some footage of Mike just spinning out of control in the air, because I have a hard drive full of it. Careful what you ask for, Mike. I'll start making the Titanic theme song of you jumping again.
Does he at least Roger up to it? Mike seems like a guy who's not in the debrief.
He takes it well.
I wasn't backsliding, and then you're like, well, that's you going across.
He takes it well. I have so many GoPro videos of me pointing at him and I'm laughing.
I'm dealing with hardware inside my body that makes me a little unkiltered. Hey, I can fall flat.
Yeah,
I can land on a very tight DC.
Yeah, fair enough.
But we went to Iceland. Yeah. That was a train wreck. We learned, don't ever let somebody else do the logistical planning.
We didn't learn that. It was reinforced. We already knew.
Yeah. Some mutual friends were there.
Yes.
And Chris told me that it was not something that he wanted to necessarily repeat either. I think they stayed a little bit longer, but I think it might have cleaned up a little bit. But
it couldn't have gotten any worse.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
So
yeah,
it was an interesting one.
It's rough.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that. I had a few choice words for a few people.
We're going back. We're going to complete that trip one way or the other. It's just it was not the right crew.
Yeah. So you're launching in December, launching early January. Okay.
Well, both December. So we've got to go to Punta Arenas. You've got to take 3 negative PCR tests. We thought we were over PCR tests.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
Okay.
To get into Antarctica, and then we're going to be staged in Antarctica from the 3rd to the 9th. So there's a weather window. We should get a fun jump in, and then the jump on the 9th will start the clock. And then from there, it is resurrecting John Candy and Steve Martin with trains, planes, and automobiles.
Yeah, for sure.
We do have a documentary film crew with us that are going to be telling the stories of the fallen that we're jumping in honor. We just did an interview with, we call her Mama Lee, Debbie Lee, which was SEAL Mark Lee's mom, because we want to tell these stories. But we got the guy who did the Blair Witch Project, Dan Myrick, who set like all the indie records for that film to include creating a sort of genre of horror films. So we've had fun, man. We're flying economy. It's going to be rough. Half of us are going to be limping, but the sleep deprivation is the biggest thing, and that increases the risk profile as we move further into the 7 continents. There's just, again, there's nothing you can do about it.
The jumping will be the easiest portion. The logistics and, all these are international flights, so you got to make the flight that day. You're probably going to wait 24. The customs clearance, get in a clearance. We were going to try to carry our rigs on the plane, but we just have too much stuff, so we're going to have to. Anything that could possibly go wrong is on the table. So we'll play it by ear, and then finally we'll get to a drop zone. Like that's like just open the door. Like that will be the easiest part, and then hurry up because we got to get to the airport.
Yeah. Jumping is almost always the actual, falling out of the plane is almost always the easiest part. Even when it's whether it's a training trip, whatever it is, it's always everything around it. As you look at this plan, besides the logistics, are there any, like, how did you select the exact positions? Was it time of flight? Was it having a liaison there at the drop zone? Like, what was the reason we picked Miami versus wherever? Talk me through kind of the planning.
Above. Yeah, it was. I'll tell you what. Perth, for natural reasons. I mean, we're going to have the Australian Special Forces guys that are going to be supporting us. They're going to jump with us.
Yeah.
Abu Dhabi, our UAE counterparts, are going to be jumping with us. So it was, as you said, all of the above. Yeah. And it changed a couple times.
Yeah.
And it's also cost.
If you trace a string out, on a flat map, you need to make it as short as possible. And if you're fighting the clock, that's really, that's what we're looking for.
We would have loved to finish in the U.S.
Yeah.
That's why Tampa coming back here is the 8th celebratory jump. But
it was originally our 7th. We were going to finish the record attempt here, but looking at it logistically, it put us too far into the corner of what we wanted to accomplish.
Yeah, coming back from Australia to get, that'd be tough. Yeah, that's awesome. Talk to me a little bit about Folds of Honor. I think a lot of our folks from Special Operations probably familiar with Special Ops Warrior Foundation, specifically to college fund for fallen special operators. If people haven't heard of Folds of Honor, what's sort of that gig?
So Folds of Honor, one, we got to make sure we're aligning with great organizations. Yep. We're going to support the Green Beret Foundation, the SEAL Foundation on future expeditions. Yep. But we've got a guy named Mike Barker, retired SEAL, who's on the trip. Okay. His children have received scholarships from Folds of Honor. Yeah. For anyone listening, if they're still active duty right now within the special operations community, they can apply for scholarships for grade school and high school for their kids, and they should. They're $5,000 scholarships. They've deployed, I want to say, over $200 million in scholarships. On this one in particular, we're trying to raise $7 million, which equates to 1,400 scholarships. But the greatest gift you can give to the kids that lost their parents is a secure education if they've earned it in high school. Yeah, absolutely. Success brings 2 world records. Andy, you had some world record for a while there. Talk me through, as you were making that circuitous path, you decided on that. What did that unlock that now kind of gives you? It's been broken. Why are we still talking about this, man?
Very true.
It has been broken.
It has been
but
broken.
You had it?
I did.
Was that sort of a thing that you're like, okay, I got some purpose out of doing that then you kind of bleeds into wanting to do this, or is it completely?
I mean, in all honesty, I think I pushed back on Mike the first time he brought this up because fundraising is very difficult. And I learned that fundraising for the SEAL Foundation. The idea for the jump came from where all great ideas do, over a cocktail with a friend.
Sure.
And I don't even know how this guy knew about wingsuit flying or a record. And he said, well, you should try to, why don't you just put a wingsuit on? Because I wasn't jumping wingsuits at the time.
Okay.
Why don't you put a wingsuit on and, try to break a record, and you could work with brands to do all that. I'm like, okay. So I agreed to do it without actually ever even jumped a wingsuit. I had to work my way back. Yeah, I did the jump in August of 15, I think it was, and I had started jumping wingsuits in like January or February of that year. So do you remember roundabout how many jumps you had when you said yes and hadn't transitioned yet over to wingsuiting? 3,000 and change. Yeah. Okay. Which I'm grateful for, because the fear of malfunctions and dealing with that had settled itself, so I could just focus on the wingsuit. But it was my first real interaction with larger brands. What are they expecting? Production and fundraising. Of all the things I've ever done in my life, I mean, obviously some are more physically challenging and psychologically challenging. Yeah. Fundraising is at the top of the list. Yeah. I don't care if you have the most worthy cause that there is. One, there is a massive amount of donor fatigue because on any social media platforms, people interface with them and it's everywhere. This year for my birthday, you know what I mean? And so unless it's like somebody in your very close social circle, they'll pay attention to that, but that's not going to get you to $7 million or the $1 million that I was trying to raise for the SEAL Foundation. And you can do news shows and, I did national news, I did local news, and the cause could not have been more worthwhile, but actually achieving that goal is so ridiculously hard. Yeah. But what I got out of it was a sense of purpose again, because I couldn't go overseas and do what I wanted to do, what I wanted to continue doing. But in my mind, the next best thing you can do is support the families, which are actually the foundation of the warfighter in the first place, which is why when Mike hit me up, and I think it was either the first or very early conversations like, hey man, just so you know, this is way harder than you think it's going to be. Yeah. But I still agreed to do it because of what it provides, that purpose. And, Mike mentioned it briefly. Our goal with the legacy expeditions, it's not Mike and I and the crew that are going to go on the 777. It's going to be enjoyable. Probably one of the most enjoyable things is going to be how much it sucks, because that's the shared hardship. That's the world that we come from. But being able to involve more people in that, and not necessarily in that realm. Maybe we take a group of veterans and we go overlanding in Moab for 3 days. Like, it doesn't have to be jumping, because that's certainly not everybody's cup of tea. Right. or alpine climbing, or I don't know, white river rafting. Why anybody would want to get into a civilian IBS is beyond me. But people do seem to like whitewater rafting. So there's a variety of things. So it allows you to have that same sense of purpose, but you can see a light switch flip on in people's heads when you expose them to it. Because for me, the reason I like it is, jumping I always loved, but this type of stuff, the planning that we're going into, jumping ATAC systems and all the training, it's like putting a foot back into the old world that I came from, but not having to deal with all the BS and stuff that we didn't want to. It's like, you know what, I'm going to go get a snack right now, and I don't care if you yell at me or not. I'm not going to go do it.
Quite literally. Yeah. Quite literally.
But it's that it brings you back to that place.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really healthy thing. I don't think people should live in the past, but there's nothing wrong with taking a trip down memory lane. And if you look at most of the physical skills that they taught us, they are wholly useless outside of the military. Unless you go into like the contracting space or the law enforcement space. Like jumping is like a completely and utterly useless skill in the civilian world. I mean, it's exciting and it's fun and we all really enjoy it.
True.
But to be able to do something with that skill that we spent so much time training with and actually have a positive impact for others, like I'm all on board for that.
No, that's awesome.
That shared adversity that you have in the qualification course or BUDS. I mean, I could run into somebody who I went through BUDS with in 2003.
Yeah.
Have not seen him my entire career, run into him, and it would be like I saw him last week.
Yeah.
And we get to feel that again. I mean, the hardest part about leaving the military is you lose your tribe.
Yep.
And it is a funny tribe. You love all your brothers. That doesn't mean to say that you like all your brothers. But there are idiots sometimes. And that's what I got from Everest. And that's why I told him, I'm like, bro, like a couple soft guys, never even knew him, like thick as thieves. The Google chats thing is still going on. Yeah. There's guys that need that, man, because you're not going to find that in the private sector ever. And I think that's for those listening that are retiring, just try to come to resolution on that. You are never going to find what you had here again.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
life's got to go
yourself
up.
Lucky. Consider yourself
the
lucky.
alternative. You could, you could be a name on the wall.
Sure.
So you got to find that purpose and keep going. I know folks can find more at legacyexpeditions.net. As we wrap up our time, I got to ask a podcast question because both you guys podcasters. Andy, you talked about it a little bit with Cleared Hot, super successful podcast. What made you sort of get into that? You touched on it earlier, but what have you found throughout that, and what's sort of been unexpected? What's come out of it so far? What keeps you doing it?
So it came about accidentally.
Yeah.
I try to listen to people who are smarter or more successful than me, which is really easy because basically every room I go into, I am the bottom of the totem pole on both of those things. The record jump attempt for the fundraising, that was not my idea. It was somebody else's.
Sure.
And I was thinking about it. I'm like, okay, that could be cool. And that led to a lot of other things, which led to me. The first podcast I was ever on was actually a CrossFit specific podcast. I'm trying to remember what exactly it was called, but Tate Fletcher, who was a jiu-jitsu player. He's actually in a bunch of movies. He does a bunch of stunt stuff. He was on that podcast and he introduced me to Brian Callen. And I went on the Fighter and the Kid podcast with Brendan Schaub and Brian Callen. I'm just talking about the fundraising. And about a week later, Tate hit me up. He goes, hey, we're going to go on Rogan's podcast. I'm like, okay. I'm like, cool. Fear Factor guy's got a podcast. Right on.
Might be kind of popular. Yeah.
I had no idea.
I know. That's what's
no clue.
It's hilarious.
I had absolutely no clue. I'd never listened to it. Roll up there with Tate, meet Joe, hit it off.
Yeah.
And just kind of stayed in contact. Yeah. And eventually he reached out. He's like, you should start a podcast. Yeah. I'm sitting there, and I actually think my response was, maybe when yours gets a little bit more successful, I'll listen to some of your advice, because that's probably sounds like what I would say. But I started thinking about it and I was like, but it, why not? What is there to lose? And I didn't know what it was going to be about. And somebody else came up with the name Cleared Hot. And one of the sponsors I was working with in the skydiving space actually bought me my first little kit, which was like a little Zoom H6D with 2 microphones and 2 headsets and no video whatsoever. And I wasn't on a consistent release cycle. And then it just kind of built. And I would do these episodes. I'm like, man, that's fun. Sitting there talking to people about them. Yeah. And learning about them. And so it slowly just built over time. I've been at it now for 5 years, I think. Yeah, 5 years and change. Yeah. And I still don't know where I'm going to go with it, but it is by far the most rewarding and enriching thing that I do because of the exposure to the people who get to sit down across from me and I just pick their brain for hours.
Yep. Absolutely. Mike, as you started working with Men's Journal and doing this Everyday Warrior kind of thing, how did that get started, and what have you found as you've been doing that?
That came from the book. I wrote a review on the book.
Nice.
And then I talked to the guy who was doing the article on that, and I told him about my philosophy about, hey, everyone's a warrior. Yeah. There's a difference between warfighters and warriors. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive. And they called back three weeks later, and they're like, hey, would you like to stand up a column called The Everyday Warrior? And I'm like, okay. Wrote about the high performers I served with. That transitioned into the Everyday Warrior podcast. And similar to what Andy said, it's, my life is like basically the diagram of the Dunning-Kruger effect. I've hence come off Mount Stupid, and I'm on the decline. I'm probably at the bottom of the trough, and now the real learning starts. But when you talk to guys like Shaun White and some of these, like Sammy Hagar, and how wild their lives were. And I had these preconceived notions of Shaun White's just sort of that like hang loose, just let it fly type guy. And you see how calculated and diligent he was. Yeah. I've come to realize how little I know. And so those conversations, I'm learning more from them than they're learning from me. And then if the listeners can learn a little, it's fun. But it's the podcast space is saturated. Andy's been met with a lot of success because of his hard work. I'm at the bottom of the rung right now. I just have the Men's Journal brand name, and we're trying to climb, but I'm having fun while I'm doing it.
Yeah, it's for me, it's the same way. I've only been doing it for a couple of years now, but I never expected. I was sort of in the same boat.
It's fun.
And then it was like, oh, I get to when would I get a chance to talk to you two, right? And just sit down for an hour and like, hey, let's actually have like a full conversation, no phones, just hang out, talk.
Well, we have our phones here, but you don't let us bring them.
I know. That's exactly why. Yeah.
Gave me sort of
total dick move.
Flashbacks to the military. And I'm sorry we didn't meet expectations for a conversation with us for an hour. I'm sure we fell
you did great.
Far below the bar.
No, you did great. It's not quite Rogan, but hey, I appreciate you guys coming. I'll let you guys have a last word, each. And then I'll get you out of here. But Andy, anything you want to leave with the listeners, whether it's about the expedition, whether it's about anything?
Mike, you go first. It's like ordering food. I like to go last so I can draft off other people's ideas.
Leaders speak last. Hey, first off, thanks for the opportunity. I know we've been trading emails and LinkedIn messages for quite a while. Looking back and reflecting, I've had a lot of time to reflect on how I led and the men and women, the caliber of the people I was surrounded by, and I am blessed. And for this next generation who's going to be better than us, thanks for what they do. Continue to hold the standard, raise the bar a little bit, but could not be more proud of these young SF, SEALs, AFSOC guys, Raiders. They're complete and utter studs.
Yeah.
Not the way I thought you were going to go with it. But
and buy my stuff. I'm joking.
Good. Yeah. Your vitamins, your hair growth supplements.
There you go. Fucking dick.
Yeah. What to leave the listeners with? I mean, I feel fortunate to be sitting here. I at a young age, I thought I knew what I wanted to do for a living, and then I got to that community, and it was everything that I thought it would be, and then things that I never could have even imagined post 9/11. And there was good with it, and there was bad with it, but the things that leave the mark the most on me are the people that I was around, and people will say, hey, thank you for your service. And that one always makes me uncomfortable because I enjoyed like 98.5% of it and I volunteered for it.
Yeah.
And I truly have never done a courageous thing in my life, but I was surrounded by people who on a daily level would do those things. And a lot of them didn't get the chance to come home. So I feel very fortunate to be here. And it's a weird juxtaposition. Like you want to be happy about where you are and celebrate where you are.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you're like, fuck. You remember kids that don't have fathers, you know, and the actual, there's a difference between the cost and the price of war, and it's, for people out there, one of the healthiest things that I try to do is just to think a little bit outside of myself and just to think about what it actually takes to provide what we have. A lot of people will say, hey, thank you for my freedoms. I'm like, listen, the freedoms you get in this country were secured in the foundational documents of this country. I'm not that old. I realize I have some gray hair, but just take it easy. So I didn't provide any of your freedoms. Hopefully I was able to put my finger in some of the, water coming out of a dam a little bit, but there's people out there every single day who are doing that. My time is well past. It doesn't hurt you to think about that a little bit, and it will temper the way that people interact with each other if they have just a little bit more appreciation for what it actually takes. And in a world that is instantaneous and you can just scroll and swipe, that's a tough one. So, maybe put the phone down for a few minutes every once in a while and just think about how lucky we are.
Yeah, well said. Well, on behalf of General Fenton, CSM Shorter, everybody at SOCOM, thanks both of you guys for coming in, talking a little bit about your career and what your experience in SOF, and also good luck on the Legacy Expedition 777. I think it's going to be awesome. I'm looking forward to seeing the Everest documentary and to following your progress. And hopefully some of you out there listening get a chance to check them out. I know there's some social media things that'll be put out there. I know afterwards it'll take a little while to get that documentary out, but I know you guys are going to be chronicling some of that stuff. And obviously check out some of the footage and check out the causes that they're supporting. And thanks for listening to another episode of SOFcast. If you've got an idea of someone you would like to hear, hit us up, SOFcast@SOCOM.mil. Check US SOCOM out, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. And wherever you're listening to this right now, give us a like, a subscribe, 5-star review. Send it to somebody in your team who you think might get a little bit out of this, especially when it comes to finding your purpose in different ways. Andy, I think it was really well said. Don't put yourself in so much stress if you don't have that purpose or you don't have that exact thing locked up on the way out. So on behalf of all of us here at SOCOM, thanks for listening to another episode of SOFcast.